Disclaimer. This analysis is based on publicly observable events, documented timelines, industry practices, and logical inference. It does not claim access to classified information, nor does it assert definitive conclusions regarding any individual's legal responsibility. Its purpose is to highlight inconsistencies, overlooked details, and structural patterns that merit public scrutiny. All interpretations should be understood as analytical commentary, not formal accusations. Critical discussion is welcome. When law enforcement breaks the law. The first lie appeared on the evening of September 11, 2025, less than 12 hours after paparazzi announced that Menglong had fallen to his death in a Beijing residential compound. An obituary, polished and solemn, was posted on Weibo under Menglong's name and signed by his studio. Fans clung to hope that it was a cruel hoax, but that hope vanished instantly. Desperate for verification, netizens checked the corporate registry. Both of Yu's registered studios had been dissolved months earlier. A legally non-existent entity had just announced a death the police were still, in theory, investigating. The announcement remains visible to this day. 3 months after the news broke, no authority ever explained how a ghost company could speak with such confidence. That single brazen illegality was the opening note of everything that followed. Within hours, video fragments began surfacing. Yu face down on the pavement with a pool of blood beneath him and his abdomen heavily bandaged, dragged in a corridor seen through a peephole, sobbing uncontrollably, slumped in a brightly lit room while men stood over him, amid lightning and rain matching Beijing's September 9-10 storm, walking upstairs between two heavy-build figures, limping, clearly injured, shouting for help while dangled outside a high-rise. Voices were recognizable, even through pixelation. Eyewitnesses spoke of days of captivity and used desperate calls for help. Yet Chaoyang police opened no criminal file. On September 16th, the same dissolved account posted again, this time in the voice of Yu's mother, pleading with fans to stop spreading rumors and accept that her son had died accidentally. Netizens begged for any proof that the mother was safe and speaking freely. None ever came. 5 days later, on September 21st, the police finally broke their silence. Their statement was not an investigation report. It was a rumor refutation notice. It declared that Yu had died from an alcohol-related fall, labeled phrases such as Yu was beaten, Yu was tortured, Yu was pushed, and Yu's mother is being controlled as malicious fabrications, and announced administrative punishment for 3 ordinary citizens who had repeated them. The briefing claimed that all necessary procedures, scene examination, forensic autopsy, witness interviews, surveillance review, had been conducted, and that no criminal suspicion existed. The mother's post was presented as the only legitimate family statement. The illegal September 11th announcement that had ignited national outrage was ignored entirely, erased from the narrative, even though it remained visible to anyone viewing the same Weibo page. Police do not overlook evidence that is literally in front of them. They erase it only when ordered to. China's criminal procedure law is unambiguous. When a death is accompanied by leaked footage of violence, visible injuries on the corpse, eyewitness claims of foul play, and massive public concern, a formal criminal investigation must be opened, even without a complaint from relatives. The scene must be secured, evidence preserved, autopsy and toxicology reports provided on request, and no external party, especially a dissolved ghost company, may issue a death announcement before procuratorial approval. Chaoyang police violated every single one of these provisions with methodical calm. In China, local police do not break their own laws so uniformly and so publicly unless directed by a level that cannot be refused. That was the moment millions of ordinary citizens reached the same chilling conclusion. Someone far above the police was blocking the investigation and ensuring the case faded from public view. Speculation exploded online. A swallowed USB drive containing laundering evidence, high-level money laundering networks, illegitimate children of red elites, and connections to powerful families. Names like Kai Chi, Wang Xiaohong, and Xi Wanping circulated, along with multiple alleged perpetrators linked to security organs or state enterprises. In response, the government launched a nationwide Clean Internet 2025 operation, erasing nearly all mentions of Menglong from Chinese platforms. Yet, audiences did not stay silent. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary Chinese, many for the first time, bought VPNs, bypassed the Great Firewall, and shared information on X, YouTube, Facebook, and Threads. Others contacted authorities demanding the case be reopened, only to receive identical replies. Please rely on the police briefing, ignoring the suspicious and illegal nature of the original notice, and only family members may request investigation, a claim that directly contradicts Chinese criminal law. Even more telling, when confronted, the alleged perpetrators showed no concern about public outrage, despite leaked footage clearly placing them at the scene. When perpetrators show no fear, after Yu's death, the perpetrators neither panicked nor hid. Some feigned ignorance, hiring lawyers to accuse rumor mongers. Others, like Song Yiren and Fan Shiki, acted provocatively. Xin Qi vanished quietly, signaling covert protection from higher authority. Tian Hairong, an heiress and investor, cried at her failed premiere, not with guilt, but as if paying the price for decisions made by others. Their behavior only makes sense if they believed the state shielded them. They went further, intimidating others who refused to stay silent. Media insider Qi Lili from Beijing publicly claimed she was repeatedly targeted in staged car accidents after speaking out for Yu. Screenshots of harassing phone calls listed names such as Cheng Qing Song, Gao Taiyu, Li Ming, also known as Ji Guangguang, and Du Qiang. Her resistance came at great personal cost. She quit her job, sustained injuries to her left hand and right arm, and remains under threat. All of her Weibo accounts, including a newly registered one after the old account was silenced, have been banned. This underscores the broader climate of fear and control, evidencing a pattern of state-backed intimidation surrounding Yu's case. The perpetrator's audacity, defiance, and lack of fear reveal the state's presence in the crime. They acted like assets, not ordinary criminals, confident in protection, until the system discards them if necessary. Once we map out every detail, one conclusion is unavoidable. Chaoyang police did not merely fail to enforce the law, they actively obstructed justice. Why? Because they were not protecting the perpetrators, they were protecting the system. A system in which certain people cannot be investigated, certain crimes must not be named, certain evidence must be erased, certain witnesses silenced, and certain deaths rewritten as accidents. In such a system, truth is defined by ultimate power and exists only by political permission. Only when a case touches the core interests of the regime do we see this level of coordinated lawbreaking. This leads to the central question: what did Menglong know, and why did the state perceive it as so threatening that it deployed its full apparatus of violence against him? What we know, and what we can infer. Before we explore what Menglong may have uncovered, we must draw a clear line. We cannot directly retrieve his studio's internal financial records, nor claim definitive evidence of state-sponsored laundering involving his two studios. However, publicly documented facts allow us to build a strong, logical case. State-sanctioned money laundering by the CCP is not a conspiracy, it is documented fact. For more than 2 decades, the U.S. Treasury, Department of Justice, FinCEN, intelligence agencies, and allied governments have published reports and indictments detailing how the CCP moves illicit capital overseas through underground banking systems, shell companies, state-linked enterprises, cultural exchange entities, and media production fronts. Australian intelligence and EU Parliament briefings have confirmed these networks, highlighting the entertainment sector as particularly laundering-friendly. Unlike Hollywood, where issues are commercial, China's entertainment industry is centralized under political authority, structurally designed for both capital operations and political control. This ecosystem is ideal for laundering. Film budgets are opaque, artist fees manipulable, production expenses inflated, live events generate unverifiable cash. Many firms are state-owned or politically supervised. EE Media, Tianyu, which controlled Yu's career, is wholly owned by the Hunan Broadcasting System, and its finances ultimately answer to CCP political and propaganda structures. SOEs like EE Media routinely employ layered subsidiaries, opaque financial departments, political officers, predatory contracts, forced studio registrations, restricted autonomy, and surveillance disguised as management. Artists' studios are financial instruments, not personal businesses. All of this describes exactly what happened to you: predatory contracts, career manipulation, replacement of assistants with minders, dissolution of his studios without consent, total schedule control, and systematic stripping of autonomy. This is not mismanagement. It is the standard operating logic of a CCP-run SOE. Laundering can and does get exposed when individuals in the pipeline act recklessly or disobediently. For years, the CCP used Zhejiang's casinos, scam compounds, and offshore shell networks as laundering channels across Southeast Asia. His operations moved billions in illicit capital, expanded United Front influence, and functioned as financial infrastructure for state-linked actors. That was why he operated with complete impunity, why he was celebrated as an overseas Chinese business leader, and why he appeared at high-level events, including a dinner reception attended by Xi Jinping. But in a system like this, protection lasts only as long as obedience does. When Xi refused a CCP directive, reportedly an order to relocate to Taiwan under the guise of business expansion, widely understood as an intelligence assignment, he instantly transformed from an asset into a liability. Overnight, the man who had laundered money for the state was suddenly accused of laundering money against the state. China issued an international warrant, Thailand detained him, and he was charged with the very crime he had been committing under CCP direction. Chengzhi is another example of how deeply the CCP's financial networks penetrate overseas criminal economies. As chairman of Prince Holding Group in Cambodia, he operated at the intersection of state-linked Chinese capital, casino-based laundering, and transnational crime. His companies moved large volumes of illicit Chinese funds through real estate, investment parks, casinos, and front enterprises, forming part of the laundering pipeline Beijing relies on throughout Southeast Asia. Cambodian investigative reporting and regional intelligence assessments have long noted his cooperation with Chinese state interests, particularly in supporting United Front influence networks and infrastructure tied to China's strategic footprint. His later designation as an Interpol fugitive only underscored how extensive and internationally visible these laundering operations had become. In 2017, just 1 month after its establishment, Shanghai Qimeng Film and Television Culture Studio applied to register the trademark Menglong under an unexpected category, Class 13, Firearms and Fireworks. This classification covers everything from rifles and pistols to bombs, landmines, gunpowder, and even ballistic missile components. In the context of state-sanctioned money laundering, this is not surprising. Yu's studios were never unique. They were standard nodes in a much larger laundering network. But Yu himself was the anomaly. In a system where every artist is expected to be an obedient asset, a person who refuses to comply becomes a liability, and liabilities must be neutralized. Yu Menglong's tragedy becomes comprehensible only through this logic. He was targeted not because he tried to expose the system, but because he refused to participate in it. CCP-linked laundering depends on obedience and silence. Yu violated one and threatened the other. Why the CCP conducts state-linked money laundering. Now a new question arises. As a sovereign state and permanent UN Security Council member, why does the CCP resort to illegal money laundering? The answer lies in the multi-layered strategic value of laundered capital. In the CCP system, cleaned funds are rarely for private enrichment alone. They become tools to fuel covert operations, foreign influence campaigns, global crime networks, and even geopolitical conflicts. Laundering as infrastructure for global crime and illicit trade, US authorities, including FinCEN and the Department of Justice, have identified Chinese money laundering organizations, CMLNs, as major facilitators of international illicit trade. These networks funnel drug cartel profits, including fentanyl money, support human trafficking flows, move proceeds for cyber scams and gambling operations, and operates sophisticated underground banking systems across Asia, North America, and Europe. These networks don't merely hide criminal profits, they sustain entire illicit economies. Laundered capital fuels, state strategic engines funds routed through shell companies, fake consulting firms, or offshore conduits often end up in real estate, international acquisitions, belt and road infrastructure, state-linked investment vehicles, and covert influence operations abroad. Investigations show these flows intersect with organizations tied to state intelligence and Chinese organized crime, including those involved in drug, human, and arms trafficking. Arms trade and geopolitical funding, including Russia's war. One of the most concerning uses of laundering pipelines is geopolitical. Western intelligence agencies have documented China supplying Russia with dual-use goods, drone components, optics, and machine tools, often moving through opaque intermediaries and shell firms. Chinese underground banking networks are suspected of helping Russia bypass sanctions by moving capital covertly. In short, laundered money and clandestine trade networks help sustain Russia's war effort, not via official budgets, but through deniable financial and logistical channels. Entertainment industry laundering is particularly useful. It provides flexible, untraceable capital for foreign proxy support, sensitive military-adjacent exports, and other covert geopolitical operations. Money laundering as a weapon of control and influence. Beyond geopolitical objectives, laundered funds flow into pro-CCP media, propaganda projects disguised as cultural exchange, influence networks abroad, United Front operations, and overseas community capture. In effect, laundering is both a financial and political weapon, a means of soft power, coercion, economic infiltration, and extending the CCP's reach globally. Who pays for the CCP's money laundering? Chinese taxpayers bear the cost of the CCP's laundering system in ways both direct and silent. Public funds that should support hospitals, pensions, disaster relief, and schools are siphoned into shell companies, offshore accounts, and covert networks. When billions disappear into these laundering pipelines, the shortfall is covered by higher fees, shrinking social services, and new taxes. SOEs involved in laundering accumulate hidden debts, later bailed out with taxpayer money. China's social security funds and state-owned banks are major shareholders of EE Media's parent company, Mango Excellent Media. Losses are socialized, while gains remain privatized. Domestic capital is drained from social services and investment in sustainable development, leaving fewer jobs, stagnant wages, and an economy struggling to grow amid Western world decoupling. Young people face record unemployment because the capital that could support them has already been siphoned off. This also explains why, after 40 years of so-called marketization, China still lacks a strong domestic consumer base. Real consumption requires disposable income, stability, and trust, all systematically stripped by the regime. Predatory taxes, inflated housing costs, depleted savings, and disappearing public services leave ordinary people unable to spend, while the regime shifts blame onto foreign forces for economic frustration. The risks are geopolitical as well. Laundered funds support arms-related procurement and sanction evasion, including assistance for Russia's war in Ukraine and other covert operations. While the CCP may see these acts as serving its interests, they deeply sabotage the nation, exposing China to retaliation and sanctions whose costs ultimately fall on ordinary citizens through factory closures, job losses, and economic instability. This is why the CCP hides its laundering operations. If the public ever understood the scale of the theft, how their savings, housing, pensions, and children's futures were drained to sustain a corrupt political machine, the regime would be exposed. Its power relies not on strength, but on concealment. Its stability rests on ignorance and fear. In this context, Menglong became an existential threat. His integrity, refusal to be corrupted, and potential knowledge of the regime's financial machinery meant he could expose the truth simply by surviving. In a system sustained by lies, a single honest individual with awareness is more dangerous than an army. That is why he could not be allowed to walk free. And did Yu Menglong know he was up against the state? At first, Yu Menglong likely believed he was fighting an abusive company, not the state. The early signs, predatory contracts, forced schedules, exponential penalty for premature termination, resembled corporate coercion, the sort of exploitation many artists endure under SOEs. Nothing in those early years would have told him he was facing something far larger than EE Media. Newly surfaced videos show that Yu was wearing a court-level electronic monitoring device, in use at least as early as April 2024. Such devices can only be issued by state authorities, never by a company, even an SOE, which means his situation had already escalated far beyond a contract dispute. This was the moment Yu stopped being treated as an artist and began being treated as a potential political risk. The most likely trigger was a combination of fear and suspicion. Yu's repeated refusal to renew his contract, even after prior escalations of handling, was a red flag. The fear of his handlers may have intensified as the contract term approached its end, or it may have been triggered if he attempted to seek help via livestream, which was discovered. We also know that Yu's Taobao account operated under the name Gu Xiaomeng, an undercover persona inspired by a character who fought for her beliefs. From Yu's perspective, secretly gathering evidence may have reflected the same moral commitment. If he had indeed collected information, it would have heightened suspicion, as Du Qiang monitored him constantly. The ankle monitor was therefore very likely another escalation, deployed to crush his will and render him a de facto prisoner of the state. In such a system, once authorities suspect someone might resist or know too much, certainty is irrelevant. Mere suspicion is sufficient to justify heightened control and ultimately destruction. The tragedy of Yu's trust. This is the one truth Yu likely never grasped. His upbringing, his education, and his own kindness worked against him. He still believed that if he followed the rules, the state would follow them too. His final words, "I've been following the rules since childhood," expose the heartbreaking innocence of that belief. He did not understand that in the CCP's logic, innocence is irrelevant. Obedience is all that matters, and once the state viewed him as a threat, his integrity became fatal, a level of control, harsher than that, imposed on dissidents. Comparing Yu's circumstances with those of China's well-known political dissidents reveals something chilling. Even high-profile figures, such as journalist Gao Yu, prosecuted, imprisoned, and placed under years of residential surveillance, still retain access to the internet, VPNs, basic communication with family, and some degree of personal autonomy. They are pressured, monitored, and censored, but not physically broken. They can still leave statements, write letters, and appear publicly. Yu Menglong, by contrast, appears to have been subjected to far more extreme control. The leaked footage suggests physical coercion, the ankle monitor indicates formal state supervision, and on top of everything else, Yu left no word, no message, no diary entry, no final note. This complete silence reflects a level of isolation no dissident has ever faced. That absence is its own testimony. Yu's communication, environment, and movements were tightly controlled, likely every minute of every day. His freedom had been taken from him long before the night of his death. Why Yu Menglong? If Yu eventually became a threat, why choose him in the first place? Why didn't they see the risk? Because Yu was valuable, and they misread him. State-backed companies like EE Media select artists with long-term commercial potential, strong public credibility, and clean reputations. People like that make large financial flows appear ordinary rather than suspicious. Unlike artists such as Jing Tian, who had powerful backers but weak public affinity, Yu's appeal was authentic. His gentle demeanor, immaculate image, talent, and effortless likability indicated that he could become a major commercial asset with minimal investment. From the regime's perspective, he was the ideal carrier for financial operations, attractive, trustworthy-looking, compliant-seeming. And in a totalitarian system, the assumption is always the same. Everyone bends, no one refuses, no one risks their future. But Yu did. He couldn't be corrupted. He wouldn't trade dignity for resources. He resisted manipulation even when cornered. He kept a moral center inside a system built precisely to erode it. They expected obedience. They encountered integrity. By the time they finally understood that Menglong was not manageable, that he was not just uncooperative but potentially dangerous to the machinery itself, it was already too late. They chose him because he was valuable. They failed to foresee the risk because they mistook his gentleness for weakness. They never realized his gentleness came from strength. The system's panic after Yu refused to renew his SOE contract triggered automatic escalation, intensified surveillance, psychological and physical abuse, and enforced isolation. For his handlers, this was the routine breaking down sequence used on anyone who resists. They likely assumed that 3 years of brutality would be enough to crush him, but they miscalculated again. Menglong embodied the one thing a totalitarian regime cannot tolerate: a human inside the machine who remains unbroken. Once the system realized he could not be bent, it acted immediately, from using him, to damaging him, to eliminating him. This was the machine following its preordained protocol. But why they had to be so cruel? Silencing him alone would suffice to keep their secret. Why the prolonged psychological breaking, physical assault, humiliation, and sadistic violence? That's because, in a totalitarian state, violence is never just an action, it is deterrence. Yu was not the only target. The industry was Yu's refusal to comply with state directives, combined with his knowledge of laundering operations, made him a liability. In a totalitarian system, liabilities of that scale require more than removal. They demand spectacle. His suffering was a warning to tens of thousands in the entertainment industry. Do not resist, do not flee, and do not imagine that fans, fame, or talent will protect you. Handlers like Du Qiang acted not as individuals, but as extensions of the system, mirroring the soft enforcers used against detained officials. The isolation, deprivation, surveillance, and sexualized violence Yu endured were designed for someone deemed politically dangerous, not a celebrity. The premeditated discipline party, likely beginning on September 8th, followed the familiar logic of CCP compromat: ritual humiliation, drugging, sexual assault, psychological coercion, and filmed degradation. Yu resisted. He did not break and refused to surrender the USB containing evidence. When ritual humiliation failed, the system escalated. Humiliation became torture, and torture became murder. The cruelty was the point. If the state had merely wanted him dead, they could have arranged a quiet disappearance, a medical incident, or an off-camera accident. Instead, Yu was monitored, isolated, mutilated, tortured in front of bystanders, and left with injuries consistent with both on-site and medical-level cutting. It was a demonstration, a message for the entire industry. If they could do this to someone as innocent and beloved as Yu, what chance does anyone else have? A totalitarian regime cannot tolerate precedent. The greatest fear of a totalitarian regime is not dissent itself, but precedent. If even one artist successfully defies the system, others learn that resistance is possible. Yu's fate had to be unforgettable, brutal, humiliating, and unmistakable. His injuries, the cover-up, and the perpetrator's audacity were all parts of the same choreography. They acted confidently because they knew they were not alone. The cruelty points to one conclusion: it was the will of the system. Remember Menglong. Menglong's story reveals a system that places its own survival above everything else, including human life. The brutality he endured, the manipulation, and the silencing all point to one truth. The ultimate perpetrator was not the individuals who harmed him, but the system that enabled them. The CCP regime orchestrates this violence, rewriting truth and punishing anyone who refuses to bend. Yu became a target not for opposing the regime, but because he possessed what a totalitarian system cannot tolerate: integrity. In such a system, moral courage is defiance, integrity is a threat, humanity itself becomes a crime. Yu's tragedy is also a warning. The machinery that destroyed him is real, methodical, and designed to consume anyone deemed inconvenient. Yet it also reveals something deeper. Even under extreme coercion, surveillance, abuse, and terror, Yu's humanity remained intact. His refusal to be corrupted, his instinct to do what is right, and the quiet strength with which he held his values made the system nervous. Violence, in the hands of the totalitarian state, is always an expression of fear. The regime crushed Yu because he was brave and human. A heartless cog never threatens that machine, but humanity does. This is why remembering Yu Menglong matters. His decency, integrity, and quiet courage made him a threat to a system built on fear. He embodied a rare heroism, the ability to remain human in a structure designed to strip humanity away. To honor him, we must carry that spirit forward, preserve his story, challenge false narratives, protect others in moments of vulnerability, and refuse to let fear dictate our choices. Living with courage and compassion continues the strength he carried, and it is this strength that can guide us toward a better, shared future.